a dream unlike any in human history. Sometime in 2023, if everything goes absolutely right, a group of 9 to 11 ordinary people, well, extremely talented people, will join an eccentric billionaire on a journey unlike any other taken in the history of the human species. The mission is, of course, called dearMoon, and unless you've already submitted your application, you, like me, are out of luck. The process has been closed down, and the applications have been accepted at this point, and now the selection process begins. And to be honest, your odds weren't that great to begin with. There are thousands upon thousands of people, and only 8 seats available. But considering the mission parameters as described by SpaceX and the billionaire who's paying for all of this, the individuals who are going to be filling these 8 seats are going to be uniquely talented individuals, artists, musicians, dancers, people who can experience spaceflight unlike anybody else in history. And in my opinion, if this mission is to be carried out successfully and safely and anywhere close to the departure date that we're talking about, or SpaceX is talking about anyway, it needs to be done a little bit differently. Not with a Starship, but with the Lunar Starship. Now, at first glance, this notion may seem to be absolutely ridiculous. The Lunar Starship is designed to go to the moon, not to come back from it. It doesn't have a heat shield, it doesn't have flaps or fins or avionics, anything designed for a safe landing on Earth. Why in the hell would I advocate something like this? Well, for a number of very important reasons. Because in my opinion, the only safe way to do this in the amount of time that remains between now and the theoretical dearMoon departure date is to use the Lunar Starship and the Crew Dragon in concert with each other. Why is all of this necessary? And am I just being a Starship basher as I've been in the past? Well, no. And I'm going to explain why all of this is necessary and how it's going to make this magnificent experience possible for everyone. And I'm going to explain all of this to you in just a few minutes. Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. So, dearMoon, I have covered this topic in the past, but it was about 4 months ago, and frankly, there weren't a whole lot of views for the video at the time, and also there have been a number of changes that have taken place with dearMoon that I think need to be covered, just for the sake of being complete about the topic, and also because it is so damned exciting. I mean, think about it for a moment. We're talking about the first civilian, non-professional astronaut visit to the moon. Granted, orbiting the moon, but still an unbelievably ambitious mission. And given the way that I've been talking about Starship for the last several months, just as a reflection, my own commentary on what's been going on with the testing process, a lot of folks would probably be pretty damn surprised for me to say that it is possible for dearMoon to take place by 2023 or perhaps 2024. But, I mean, why the hell would I say something like that given the way that I've been talking so far? I mean, no Starship prototype has managed to land successfully yet. Maybe they've come a bit close with SN10, although that was a very hard landing with a fire going before the landing even started. So, the ship was definitely doomed there, and if it had had a crew on board, they would have been doomed as well. So, the landing process still is something that is very, very much up in the air and needs to be perfected if Starship is to be carrying humans, right? Right? Well, no. That's actually not the case at all. As long as Starship has a viable life support system and manages to achieve orbit, and it can be refueled, and that's a lot of ifs, obviously, then the crew don't have to go up in the ship and they don't have to come down. They can be transported, as I have suggested before and others have suggested, by means of the Crew Dragon. And in my opinion, this is something that SpaceX should be considering, and they probably already are. Just the way that Elon is talking and the way he discusses as to whether or not, Starship is going to be ready by 2023 or 2024 for human passengers. He's very vague and open-ended in the way that he talks about that. Yes, it'll be ready to carry humans, but not necessarily to land safely with humans, not necessarily safe to take off with humans on board, not with a level of safety that I think Elon wants to see with Starship. In other words, he wants to see Starship being significantly safer than the space shuttle, and that's going to require a lot of successful landings, a lot of successful takeoffs, just a lot of entirely successful test missions before human beings are placed on this ship. And that could take a lot longer. In my opinion, 2026 or so before we're looking at the full-fledged use of humans. And that is the earliest that could possibly be managed. And, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but I'm going to show you a lot of information in this video as to what happened with Crew Dragon, which is a much less ambitious craft designed to carry humans, and how long that took to perfect, to give us an idea of how long it's going to take SpaceX to perfect the Starship for human transport, and why, if we want dearMoon to take place, in 2023, 2024, or thereabouts, using the Crew Dragon is a much better solution for getting the crew up to Starship and safely back down to Earth. So we're going to get right into it right now. The eccentric billionaire in question is Yusaku Maezawa, and I love his mission statement. I choose to go to the moon with artists, an obvious modification of John F. Kennedy's original go to the moon statement. And what a wonderful objective, not to go to the moon in a competition with another superpower, not to go to the moon for national pride, but to go to the moon with people who can express and share the experience in ways that other people simply cannot, to share their experience with the rest of the world in a way that will inspire the human species to move out into the solar system. So the idea is to start off on the SpaceX Starship, of course. Now, the original plan was to have a crew of 10 to 12 creative individuals that Maezawa himself and perhaps some of his advisors would select. However, as time went on, Maezawa decided that he might not be the best judge for this sort of thing, that there might be creative minds out there who were creative in ways that he didn't understand. And so he opened up 8 seats to the general public for people to put in applications describing their own unique creativity and how this would contribute to the mission. Such an egalitarian person and very inspiring. As you can see, the mission configuration is pretty simple, not terribly different from a moon mission that might have been carried out in 1968. The difference is, of course, is that Starship refuels in low Earth orbit, then makes its way to the moon, executing a free return trajectory, and then returns to Earth over the course of about 6 days, and then makes a traditional re-entry and landing. However, the traditional re-entry and landing part is where this mission becomes very dangerous and very difficult. And that's right, it's time to start obsessing about the landing, because without a successful landing, time and again, this ship will not be able to carry passengers back to Earth. SN8 failed because of pressure problems in the header tanks. SN9 failed because an engine failed to light, so there are two problems caused by two separate issues. Not exactly a great start, but nevertheless correctable. Now with SN10, I don't care who says that this ship stuck the landing. It did not. Landing pads were crushed because the vessel came down too hard, a fire was burning before the ship even sat down, and it exploded and would have certainly killed a human crew had they been on board. And then SN11, well, what can I say about that? SN11 has been the worst test thus far. According to Elon Musk, quote, a relatively small CH4 leak or methane leak led to a fire on engine 2 and fried part of avionics, causing hard start attempting landing burn in CH4 turbopump. This is getting fixed 6 ways to Sunday. Now, a hard start refers to an ignition when there's too much fuel in the combustion chamber. The pressure is too high, leading to an explosion, which is exactly what we saw. My point is, all 4 of these explosions seem to have been caused by different things, but all of them took place during the radical landing procedure that Starship needs to execute when landing on a planet with an atmosphere. I mean, can you imagine how horrific it would be if it were the dearMoon crew remains that were scattered around Boca Chica instead of just a bunch of twisted stainless steel? This is why I don't think that Elon is going to take this kind of risk with human beings for a very long time on Starship. Now, we can talk about how the Falcon 9 had similar failures until we're blue in the face, but the fact is those failures took place when Falcon 9 was trying to set down from orbit. We have yet to even attempt that with Starship. This has been a much easier landing task, only from a few thousand meters up in the atmosphere. And yet, look at the results. And it's not because there's a problem with the design, it's just that this is a very, very challenging task to try to land under these circumstances. And Elon himself has said that once Starship achieves orbit, it's going to take many attempts before Starship is able to successfully land given the difficulty involved, and a whole lot more successful landings before human beings can be risked on board. So how long is that going to take? Well, the good news is you don't have to wait for it. Instead, you can use another ship that has already been tested with human beings and is proven tremendously successful. And keep in mind, Mr. Maezawa's original plan for dearMoon was to fly a modified Crew Dragon propelled by a Falcon Heavy around the moon with a smaller group of artists. He only abandoned this plan when Elon replaced the Falcon Heavy with the Starship. So I think he would be pretty open to this idea, especially if it made the whole process safer, which it would. Crew Dragon already has a proven flight record. Crew Dragon has an abort system, and Crew Dragon has a much safer method of returning its passengers to the surface of the Earth. So how would all of this be done? Okay, so here we go. Step 1. You launch the Lunar Starship into low Earth orbit. And by the way, I propose that this ship be named the Tsukiyomi, which is the name of the Japanese moon god in honor of the country of origin for the guy who's paying for this whole thing. But of course, that would be up to him. You will notice in this animation that there are no passengers on board, which was always intended with the Lunar Starship. It's supposed to pick up passengers at the Lunar Gateway. In this case, however, the Tsukuyomi is going to be picking up its passengers in low Earth orbit. Now, once the Tsukuyomi is safely in low Earth orbit, you move on to stage 2, which is launching tankers from offshore platforms, off the coast of Texas preferably, where you can achieve the same orbit. Now, the reason you do this is so that you can get the tankers into orbit as rapidly as possible and fuel the Tsukuyomi up also as rapidly as possible, because the crew is waiting to board the Tsukuyomi on board Crew Dragons at Cape Canaveral. Now, a total of 3 tankers, or possibly 4, will be required in order to give the Tsukuyomi the necessary fuel in order to get to the moon in 3 days, perform a free return trajectory, and then return to Earth, decelerating significantly enough to re-enter low Earth orbit. Now, by this time, Starship's landing procedure will probably have gotten good enough to where at least some of these tankers can be recovered in a successful landing and reused, and this should be done, of course, whenever possible. So definitely make use of the Starship's reusability, but at the same time, don't risk human lives just yet. Step 3. Launch the 10 to 12 dearMoon passengers on board 2 separate Crew Dragons launched from Cape Canaveral, assuming you can get 2 pads open there. If not, then you may have to build 2 new pads in Boca Chica, depending on the circumstances. Either way, it's very doable, and the Crew Dragon has already proven that it's more than capable of docking with other vessels in low Earth orbit, so it can certainly dock with the Tsukuyomi. The 12 or so individuals are transferred to the Lunar Starship, and the Lunar Starship, already being filled up, is ready to make its journey to the moon. And so, step 4, the dearMoon mission is on its way, a 6-day total journey with 10 to 12 unique and creative individuals on board who will be able to share this experience with the rest of the world almost in real time. In my opinion, billions of people will be completely riveted on this experience, and these very talented individuals will be able to share their experiences in an entertaining way, the way that astronauts never could. The magnificent spectacle of our natural satellite will be shared with the rest of the world by people who can share it the best. Creative people, people who can express themselves in ways that inspire, artists who can create images that inspire, or dancers who can perform amazing feats in microgravity that are simply impossible on Earth, or musicians like this particular image that I've always found to be so inspiring. A concert in microgravity, something that has never happened before and can happen on this mission. How inspiring will this be to the rest of the world? It will change spaceflight forever. And then, once the 6-day journey is over, the Tsukuyomi docks with the 2 Crew Dragons that are still waiting in low Earth orbit. The passengers are transferred to the vehicles, and then they safely make their way back to the surface. Why do all of this? Because it eliminates the danger of these crew taking off on a bleeding-edge new spaceship like the Lunar Starship or just the regular Starship, and more importantly, it eliminates the danger of trying to land, something that's going to take a number of years, in my opinion, to be perfected to a degree to where human crew can be safely allowed aboard the Starship for this particular process. But here's the best part. The Tsukuyomi does not go away. It stays in low Earth orbit and continues to transport human passengers back to the moon, to space stations, for example, that are orbiting the moon, like the one planned by ErcX Space. So this one vessel can act as a lunar cycler, continuing to carry passengers to and from the moon for decades to come. So dearMoon can be a mission that lasts long into the future. And here's perhaps the biggest reason that Crew Dragon should be included in this process. It took 5 years for SpaceX to even deliver a prototype life support system for Crew Dragon to NASA, and a further 4 years before it was perfected. And this life support system can only maintain 4 people for about 5 days, and it only has the CO2 scrubbers to take care of that many people as well. Therefore, it's going to require an entirely new life support system to make dearMoon a reality. So this is what SpaceX needs to be focusing on, not trying incessantly to get this landing right, but getting dearMoon ready. And aside from the daunting life support system that's going to be necessary to keep 12 people alive for 6 days, you're also going to need to perfect low Earth orbit refueling and get Starship up into orbit in the first place. How much longer is dearMoon going to be delayed if we also have to get the landing down to such a degree of perfection that humans can be safely risked on board? In my opinion, it's not worth the wait. Once dearMoon is sent on its way, it's going to change things for SpaceX and spaceflight forever, and we can't afford to wait. So when Elon Musk says things like he's confident that the Starship will have reached orbit before 2023 and that it's going to be safe for human transport by 2023, I don't think he means that it's going to be safe for humans to take off in and land in by that time, but instead he has a more innovative solution in mind. So there you have it. A safe and effective way of getting 10 to 12 people around the moon in a free return trajectory and safely back to Earth. Now, I know that a lot of SpaceX fans are probably saying, oh, there he goes again, being a naysayer, saying that Starship isn't going to work. Well, no, I actually think that Starship will work eventually. However, seeing the results of SN 8, 9, 10, and 11, and the sheer difficulty of trying to land a rocket after performing that incredibly radical flip turn that Starship carries out, and trying to do that with human beings on board, and have it just being as reliable and successful and as safe as possible in the amount of time that remains between now and dearMoon, or something close to the dearMoon date, maybe 2024, 2025. I find that to be very, very difficult to believe. I just think that the entire process from takeoff to landing, it's going to be fine for cargo. I think that eventually they're going to get this process down to where they're landing 80 to 90% of their flights successfully. But that's nowhere near safe enough for human beings. Even if they're at 95 or 96%, it's still not safe enough. And consider this, dearMoon with 10 to 12 civilians on board. What happens if that ship is lost? What happens if all hands on board are lost? Now, the public and the government is not going to give one damn as to whether or not these people were prepared to face death, because they're not professionals. They didn't sign on as professionals. Now, granted, anybody who goes on this mission probably is prepared to die, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that I didn't sign on for it. The same reason that Elon says that he's not ready to go on Starship himself. I'm not confident that my kids are going to be in a stable and secure situation in the next few years to where they're going to be able to handle my untimely death. One of the reasons why I didn't apply for this whole thing, not that I had a huge chance anyway, but still, that's something that needs to be kept in mind. And really, dearMoon cannot afford to be lost. Look at the reaction that the world had when Krista McAuliffe died in that tragic situation, obviously on the Challenger. We still remember it today. The American public, by and large, still remembers it today. Can you imagine how much worse it's going to be with 10 to 12? We need to have a system, and when I say we, I mean SpaceX, needs to have a system in place whereby human beings are transported to and from the Starship with an abort system, with a tried and true and safe system of transporting humans off of Earth and back down to Earth that isn't bleeding edge, that isn't brand new, that has been used for quite some time. And by the time dearMoon takes place, the Crew Dragon is going to be a very solid vehicle, and it will be an extremely reliable one, and it will be an extremely safe one and proven. So I think that this is the option that Elon should pursue with one of his first manned missions. dearMoon has to go off without a hitch, and I think that this is the best way of doing it. And what a magnificent mission it is going to be, with artists, dancers, musicians, and who knows what else. It depends on who passes through the filter, but I think it's going to be some very special and unique people describing spaceflight in ways that no one else ever has, and performing works of art and dance and who knows what else in microgravity as they pass in front of the magnificent spectacle that is our moon, in front of the whole world as they're watching. This is going to spark human interest in spaceflight like nothing else in the past, and perhaps nothing else after it. So, that's why it has to go off successfully. That's why it needs to be as safe as possible, and that's why I think this is the way it needs to be done. If you like the way that I put things out there, expressing my opinions regardless of how unpopular they might be, it's all in the description to support me, and I could certainly use it, obviously. This channel is still in growth mode, and I would certainly like to grow one way or another, in terms of equipment, in terms of going to see additional launches. Seeing SN15 is the next thing on my list, as I continue to say. Any support would be greatly appreciated, or at least please subscribe. So, until dearMoon gets going, until we get to see this magnificent spectacle play out on our televisions or whatever we happen to be using in the next few years, as this small group of very lucky people get to experience something that so few people in history have. Until all of this comes to pass, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.